I beg you to try it, Patricio.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricio. You were there once in your life.
Hi, people. Trish Wood here. And this is indeed Trish Wood is Critical. It's a podcast about critical thinking. And boy, do we ever need that now. Nobody's doing it, right? Everything seems like it's gone insane. And we're still waiting to see the great Oz, who is manipulating all of this from behind a curtain somewhere, because it's pretty crazy right now. But a bunch of things have happened. I always like to start the show with positive things. For me personally, the big moment of the past few days has been the victory, the injunction by Judge Terry Doughty in the case Missouri v. Biden, which you've heard about on this show a lot, because Janine Eunice, who has been a friend of this show, a COVID dissident from way before when she was representing some of the major figures in our landscape. I met her on Twitter. She was a former lefty or lefty lockdown or something on Twitter. She's one of the great, great women I've met on Twitter, like Janine, like Jennifer Say, like Ann Bauer. And we all kind of became friends and admirers of one another because we were the early dissidents. So she was one of the lawyers on this case. She has been talking about that on this show and elsewhere. And it's a really, really important ruling that Judge Doughty made, because it is an anti-censorship ruling. It is a major blow against what they did during the COVIDian time for 3 years, when people who were not with the so-called consensus would post things online, like Jay Bhattacharya and Aaron Kheriaty and some of the other brave folks who stepped up to call BS on a lot of it. They were censored, they were deplatformed, they were shadow banned, and worse than that, they were certainly smeared by mainstream media. But this ruling is really about the censorship by big tech that was being directed by powerful people in high places in Washington, D.C. And of course, that affected everything in Canada too, and in the UK and elsewhere. I know we have a pretty global audience right now, but this is a landmark decision because big tech is mostly American, right? And so what happens to them is going to affect our social media around the world. So this is fantastic. It's a fantastic case. One of the fun things about it was that there was a deposition of Tony Fauci too. And that's what you get to do when you're doing a legal case. You get to get people that you're fighting against under oath, and they have to answer. It's so wonderful. So this happened. And we're going to be talking a bit about court cases today, because we're speaking to Shawn Buckley about this terrible bill that got snuck through that's going to regulate natural products here right out of business. And props to my Substack Ask Me Anything people who were suggesting that I do this. It's a really important story. So when you do write into me in the Substack format or on my email, I do listen to what y'all are saying. And so Shawn is coming up with that. And then the other lawsuit that we're going to be talking about today, that's also very, very important. And that one has been filed by Eva Chipiuk on behalf of her client, Carrie Sakamoto, who is quite severely vaccine injured. And that case is really interesting because she's suing the government almost on an informational basis. The coordination to misrepresent the safety and efficacy of this product, but she's also included the CBC in it too. So look, I am against suing journalists, but this is a new day. And I don't feel they were reporting honestly. I know they weren't. So it's really interesting that she has included in her lawsuit the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Did they meet their obligation to truth and fairness and accuracy? No, of course they didn't. Carrie Sakamoto was injured while they were shouting safe and effective at everybody. So, and, you know, I'm being pretty mean to people who'd been complaining about the possible danger of the vaccine. So that's interesting. We've got both Carrie, our vaccine injured plaintiff, and Eva, her lawyer, Eva Chipiuk, coming up in a little while. But first, I want to talk to you about this Judge Terry Doughty case from the States. I'm going to read to you something that was written by Aaron Cariati, one of the plaintiffs, about what happened. So he writes for the Brownstone Institute, one of my favorite websites. Courts rarely release rulings on federal holidays, but no doubt to drive home the point about how important this case is for our constitutionally guaranteed liberties, Judge Terry Doughty released on Independence Day, what an irony, his 155-page ruling on our request for a preliminary injunction against the government's censorship regime. Isn't that a wonderful phrase to hear? The entire document is worth reading. I will post it on Substack for those who want to dig into the details. But in short, he granted nearly all the provisions in our request, placing strict limits around any communication between government officials and social media companies. Bingo. If such communications continue, they will be subject to subpoena in our case and could implicate the actors in criminal liabilities for violating the injunction. Injunctions are a big deal, folks. They're a very useful tool sometimes. One naturally wants to believe that an issue one is involved in is of world historical importance, writes Cariati. But as the judge himself wrote in the decision, if the allegations made by plaintiffs are true, the present case arguably involves the most massive attack against free speech in United States history. Get it? Wow. That, my friends, is a strong claim, but as I have previously argued, an entirely accurate one. So that is wonderful. And I want to just dip into how ridiculous the mainstream media response has been. Of course, they're insane, right? The legacy media, which has been studiously ignoring this case, could not ignore yesterday's ruling. It was a few days ago. So there were reports in the New York Times and the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Reuters, and so forth. The Times and the Post disappointingly tried to frame the case as a partisan issue. But of course, it's not a left, right, or liberal conservative issue at all. It's a legal, illegal issue. Nicely put. The only question is whether government officials did or did not violate the highest law of the land, namely the United States Constitution. Yesterday, the court indicated that the answer to this question is likely yes. The government's actions were probably unconstitutional, and the plaintiffs are likely to succeed on the merits. The New York Times reporter even wrung their hands, worrying that the ruling could curtail efforts to fight disinformation. We saw that coming, right? Begging the question about who decides what constitutes disinformation. The First Amendment clearly indicates this cannot be the job of government. More telling, the Times and the Post, in their framing of the case, simply said the quiet part out loud, indicating that these newspapers believe government censorship is good as long as it's controlling the flow of information in directions they approve. Well put. That's exactly true. And then Matt Taibbi, who brought us the Twitter files, is quoted as saying, the ruling, which naturally will be dismissed as Republican clickbait, shows at least one federal judge agreed with the argument that a complex system to mass funnel content recommendations from enforcement agencies and politicians to tech platforms represents what the Attorney General called a sprawling federal censorship enterprise. As one of the plaintiffs, Dr. Aaron Cariati, wrote, the evidence in the suit revealed a far broader range of topics monitored by government than most people know of even now, from gender ideology to abortion to monetary policy to the war in Ukraine and beyond. These are all subjects, aren't they, people, we've been following on this show. And we know that dissident voices are being deplatformed, shadow banned. You know, people are losing their bank accounts because they're against transing children and surgeries for children. People are literally losing their bank accounts in the UK. And believe me, that will happen here because we started it with the convoy, didn't we? So, wow. Take any contentious issue in American public life, said Carrie Addy today, and it seems like the federal government, once they got this machinery rolling, just thought, okay, we can combat misinformation on all kinds of things, right? So, so they stopped it. The Missouri v. Biden investigators found the same fact patterns found by Twitter Files reporters like me, Michael Schellenberger, Barry Weiss, Lee Fung, David Swag, and Paul Thacker. And then later, Andrew Lowenthal, Aaron Matei, Sue Schmidt, Matt Orfalea, Tom Wyatt, Matt Farwell, Techno Fog, and many others did. They also echoed descriptions by Jacob Siegel. By the way, Jacob Siegel and a number of those people I just listed have been on this show talking about this very thing. So that's good, right? This is a big move forward. And I am very, very happy that that happened. So before we get to our first item, which is Eva Chipiuk and Carrie Sakamoto talking about this vaccine injury case, I'm going to do my little pitch for y'all. We're on Substack. That's now our money-raising platform because it is a free speech platform, and we really, really believe in that around here. I did put out a little bit of this judgment the day it happened for you guys. And I also have done an Ask Me Anything for premium, which is fun because you can ask me a question and I have to answer it. It's like a drinking game, you know, truth or dare. Let's truth Trish. She has to answer honestly. We can ask her anything. So that's been fun too, getting to know you. And I've got lots of show ideas too. So that's wonderful. So if you want to support what we do in the podcast and on the Substack and on my Twitter and elsewhere, we've been fighting this fight for 3.5 years, people, way before most of the people talking about it now even knew it was a problem, because we think critically around here, don't we? So please do support us. That's how we can continue to bring you content, and we love doing it. So please do. My Substack, of course, is Trish Wood is Critical. I'm on Twitter at Wood Reporting and on Instagram as well. Let's move on now. I just want to say one more little correction here. So I said about Bobby Kennedy, who I'm going to write about soon. I have a good story about him, knowing a member of his family quite well who he was pretty involved with. I said that one of the things I was suspicious about was that he was all in on Trump Russia. Apparently he has disavowed that now. And it was one of you who brought that to my attention. So I withdraw that, although I do say that even people who were into it and withdrew their support for that idea weren't thinking very critically. So I still think if you were involved in that, it's kind of bad, but he did withdraw it. So props to Bobby for doing that. Okay. Now we're going to go to Eva Chipiuk and Carrie Sakamoto. Eva is the lawyer. Carrie is a lovely vaccine-injured woman who is now suing a multitude of people in the government and public health and the CBC. Here's my interview with them. Hi, Carrie Sakamoto and Eva Chipiuk. I'm glad to have you both on. I just want to explain, we're interviewing you together, but you're in different locations. So I'm going to start with Carrie, because obviously before we talk about the legal case, which has been drawn up by Eva, we want to sort of get the details about what happened to you, Carrie. So I guess I first want to ask you, because a lot of people who are vaccine harmed are accused of being anti-vaxxers, which in and of itself is a ludicrous and absurd accusation, because you took the vaccine, so you couldn't have been very anti. But tell me what the circumstances were for you taking it and what it was, and then maybe we can move into what happened to you as a result of getting the shot. So why don't you do that, Carrie, start out that way? And I'll just say for my listeners, what happened to you was Bell palsy, which does impugn the nerves in your face, right? So is it super difficult to make yourself clear? Is that going to happen? Or
it's difficult to speak because the muscles in the side of my face are retracted and
right.
Constantly tight. So yeah, it makes speaking a little difficult.
Okay, well, just do your thing and take your time. Yeah. And we're all here listening with enthusiasm to what you have to say. So please go ahead.
So I come from a military background. Both my parents met in the military. They traveled a lot when I was younger. So I had all kinds of vaccines. I had a flu shot every year. And so when COVID hit, they isolated everybody. And I had an acreage and an elderly mother who was living in a seniors complex and was very lonely because of the isolation. So she came to live with me and my husband and my children. And I was watching on the news as everything was unfolding. So just like everybody, we were watching local stations, Canadian stations, CBC, Global, CTV, all of these stations. And they were all saying, you know, get your vaccine. We have this vaccine. Come get it as fast as you can. It just made sense to us. I'm like, I have an elderly mother. I have children. I'm homeschooling now. They're saying, get this vaccine and we can return to life as it was, hopefully. So I went down with my family and we got the first vaccine.
Which one?
So April 21st, I got AstraZeneca.
Yeah.
It's what was offered in my area and my age group. Where I live, they went by age. And so I went down and I got my shot with my husband and had a sore arm, but nothing crazy, nothing at all, really. So then some time passes and it's time to get our second vaccine, and Canada pulls AstraZeneca off the market. They said it was doing damage to people. It was causing issues. I believe I read somewhere that it was causing blood clots. So they pulled it off. So my option was to pick from Pfizer or Moderna. And so I picked Pfizer with a lot of thought. I even actually went to my doctor and she had said she can't really give an opinion because it's so new. And so it's just what I picked. So I picked Pfizer. I went down on June 18th and I got the vaccine and I got sick that night.
Sick in what way, Carrie? Sick in what way? What happened?
Flu symptoms.
Yeah, okay.
And they had said on the news stations and TV stations that people were having some reactions or symptoms from this vaccine, flu-like symptoms. So we thought this is on par. My husband had the same symptoms, achy body aches, fever, chills, just feeling rotten. So we hung out in bed, which was fine. But later on in the week, it took like a few days. Fever was pretty high for me and continued. By day 7, the evening of day 7, my husband was feeling much better and was getting himself together, and I couldn't get out of bed. I was just really, really sick, and my tonsils swelled up. So I wanted to see my doctor, but of course at the time, because of COVID restrictions, they weren't, if you were sick, you couldn't see the doctor in person. So she called me and I explained what was going on, and I had tonsil stones on the right side, and she said it was most likely from my fever from the vaccine that I had had. So I had this fever all week. And so she prescribed some antibiotics and said, call me back in a couple of days if nothing changes. That night, I started getting sick. What happened now, I know, is the meningeal lining in my brain swelled, and it goes up here behind your ear and then covers your brain. Which explains why my brain felt like it was on fire. And that's the only way I could explain it. And it made me vomit, and I couldn't stop. It was awful. So by this time, I'm sick 9 days in, and I'm 100 pounds. So I was in really rough shape. My husband said, that's enough. We're going to emergency. On the way, I could see, it felt like my face was swelling, which was weird. I was like, what's going on? So I'm looking in the mirror and I see it drop. and I thought I was having a stroke.
Yeah.
My mother had had a stroke in her 40s when I was like 15, 14 when it happened. And to me, that's what I thought was happening. And so, of course, we get into Emerge and they assess me and they said, you have Bell's palsy. My eye was paralyzed open.
Wow.
So I couldn't blink. And my, it's not just my face, it's my tongue, it's my esophagus. So I couldn't chew. My sense of smell, actually to this day, Eva, I actually haven't mentioned this, but my sense of smell and taste is off and has been since it happened. It's kind of like if you have a cold. So everything just kind of tastes off. And smell also, I can't smell a lot of things. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So you were talking about going into the hospital. You were on your way.
Yes.
You noticed that the droopiness. Yes.
They sent me home. They said, you have Bell's palsy. They put me on steroids. They said, you'll be okay. Go home. The hospital is full of COVID patients. We're taking the severe cases. Only we don't have a bed. I was like, okay. I went home. After everything wore off, they had given me, I think it was like gravel shots and stuff. It had made me stop vomiting, made the headache kind of subside. But as soon as it wore off, a few hours later, I was right back where I was. So went back in the morning, went back to emergency, and this time they admitted me. And they did CAT scans. I had a spinal tap done. MRIs, and they said it's not a stroke. It is Bell's palsy, but there's this swelling that's going on in your brain or around your brain. And after a few days in, the doctor said, this is from your vaccine. And he reported it to Ottawa. And when I got out of the hospital, I was on feeding tubes because I couldn't eat.
Yep.
I worked really hard to get out of the hospital. I was like, this is crazy. I couldn't see anybody. I couldn't see my kids because of the restrictions. They weren't letting anybody in. The only person I did see, besides my husband and my mother, was a woman who came from AHS.
Alberta Health.
Yeah.
Yep.
She came in one morning. I was very ill that morning, and she just came in and stood there and stared at me. She didn't say a word. I didn't say anything to her. I did a lot of sleeping at the time. I was very sick. So I seen her. She was just standing there. I went to sleep. She was gone. That was it. Yeah. When I got home, I received 2 phone calls from them stating I should go get a booster.
On what basis?
And that's what I said. When the girl called, I said, is this a joke? Like, do you guys not know that I'm sick from the first vaccine, like from my round of vaccines? And she goes, yeah, we know. And I said, well, how can you tell me it's safe to take this? And she said, it just is.
Wow. This story and that when what you just said is it's the kind of illogical invasion of the body snatchers speak from public health that makes absolutely no sense. I just don't get it. Let me just ask you this. I'll get to Evan in a minute, but I want to ask you. So you have these symptoms, obviously. Your doctor has connected it to the vaccine. A note was sent to Ottawa about it. Where are you now in your health situation? Is this a permanent problem for you now? Is it fixable? Will it go away after a while? What is your situation?
So I have permanent damage. I have what's called synkinesis, where everything, all the nerves and stuff in my face didn't connect properly when they were healing. And so now my face pulls forward, or backwards, sorry. My eye is pulled down, so it constantly is drooping. I struggle. I see a vestibular physiotherapist, and he says that he's done some cognitive tests, and I am operating with a concussion-like symptoms.
That's interesting. And let me ask you how you're holding up, because must be, I mean, it's one thing to be vaccine injured, and then it's another one to have to fight for people to behave in response to this the way they should be behaving. How are you, aside from the obviously health issues, how are you holding up?
So that part is really difficult. I did what was asked of me by my government and my health care system, and it made me really sick. It almost killed me. And it's a hard pill to swallow. I walked down there and did this to myself. So who's responsible? Who is to be held accountable? I tried the vaccine injury program. I was approved. I'm a part of the program. I received a small payout. It's very difficult. You don't really get any help through them at all. It's all on your own. Everything's being put on my visa. It's crazy.
I guess I'm talking about beyond the money, Carrie. I would guess, just from my own perspective, there must be a pretty big sense of betrayal here.
There is. And that's what's so hard to swallow, because now I can see they don't want to talk about it. The first thing I did when I got home was I said to my husband, we need to get this word out. These doctors in the hospitals need to know what to look for when, if people like me present. I wanted other Canadians to know that this is not safe and effective for everybody, that they should be telling people that this is happening. I couldn't get anyone to talk to me. They all said that they could not speak negatively about the vaccine. And I get that today still with what you call mainstream media.
I don't get it. And let me just say, did you have any health conditions prior to this, Carrie, or were you pretty healthy?
I was pretty healthy.
Okay,
yeah.
So let me just say this, because I was working on another project this morning and I came across again the risk stratification of death from COVID from someone your age. It was 0.035%.
I ended up getting COVID after I got out of the hospital, and with all of this.
Oh my God. I mean, it's just, I can't even. Okay. I'll come back to you in a sec, Carrie.
That's how pissed off I was about that. I'm like, are you kidding me? I got COVID after all of this?
It's like we are living in bizarro world right now. I'm telling you. It's Twilight Zone. Let me talk to you, Eva, because there are a lot of vaccine injured people in this country. Why this case and why now?
Well, number one is we need some accountability. We need people to understand, Canadians to understand what went on in the last 3 years, because it's really just, like you said, bizarro world. And Carrie is a case I came across. She presented at the National Citizens Inquiry and shared her story there. But like Carrie's case is just so heartbreaking. And really it was the information campaign from the government, followed through by the news organizations, that Carrie listened to the message they had that, watch out, be scared. COVID is here. We have a solution. It's safe and effective. Now go get your vaccine. And she listened to those instructions. And these are people in authority positions. These are public health officers and agents. And the question is, are they responsible, or can they just say whatever they want and then wash their hands of accountability? And that's basically one of the questions we're putting to the court.
I think the other aspect of this is not, well, everything you said, absolutely. But the other part of it is that it would seem that public health, working in tandem with the media, made not getting a vaccine a kind of a depersoning event. I mean, mandates or no mandates obviously were terrible, but the social pressure generated by public health and media through propaganda campaigns is also very much responsible for people getting these shots. I am unvaccinated, and I lived through that pressure campaign, and I will tell you, it was no day at the beach. My life was on hold for a very long time. So what about that part of it? Because that part of it was so dishonest, wasn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And so there's the pressure, but then so Carrie listened to it and went for those instructions. And that was all of that was terrible. But now Carrie's feeling it on the other side. Now that she's vaccine injured, she's being shamed and censored and suppressed. Just like, so the needle keeps moving, which is just awful. So, if you're going to go and shame unvaccinated people because this is safe and effective and you're doing it to protect your family and your community, and then when something happens, and then that's the new person and the new group you're shaming, come on. Like that's when, at that point, that's when I said, we need to do something. This just can't keep going on. There has to be some accountability. There has to be somebody. We need to understand what went on.
That's kind of a new day too, because, as an old school journo who did multiple investigations into pharmaceutical products liability cases, IUDs that were faulty and reporting on thalidomide, et cetera, lots of it. This is a really strange time to me where messaging in order to affect behavior trumps actual data and truth around a product, and that is happening from the highest levels of government in this country is something I never thought I would see. I never thought I would see this. Yeah.
And we're in the lawsuit, we're alleging that memos have come out, and we anticipate a lot more evidence will come out through this process, but they knew that the injuries were higher and they were suppressing that. And the other thing that we start the lawsuit off with is the fact that for usually therapeutic drugs, of course, in Canada, to be approved, you obviously and understandably, there's a criteria that they're safe and effective. That's reasonable. But for the COVID-19 vaccines, I don't think many Canadians know and appreciate that they removed that requirement. They took it out. And what they did is they put in a different test. This is the health minister. The test for the COVID vaccines was that there had to be more benefit than there was harm. But how do you assess if it's more beneficial than it is harmful if you don't know whether it's safe and effective?
Exactly.
And you haven't measured that. So it became a subjective test, and it's kind of a circular argument.
Yes.
And
keep going. Yeah.
And then not only that, they removed the requirement from it being safe and effective, yet they went around the countryside encouraging and coercing people, saying exactly that it is safe and effective. So how do you do that? Is that bad faith? Is there an additional element there of malfeasance on these officials? Is this just pure negligence? What is this? Because that certainly just can't be normal, and that shouldn't be acceptable in Canada.
This isn't really a legal question, but I'll ask you, and I'll ask Carrie as well if you've thought about it. It feels like a kind of madness descended on the country, doesn't it? I mean, everybody in a position of authority and power was promoting these things when there was a dearth of evidence for safety and efficacy too. And this has always bothered me, especially as a former legacy media investigative reporter, the idea that media and government would make a declarative and doctors statement, safe and effective, is a declarative statement, right? It's not a we think it might be, or we hope that it is, or the risk benefit we got to go with because we're in an emergency, whatever. They weren't saying that. They were saying that this product is safe and effective. And anybody hearing that would expect that that would mean that it's not going to cause you bad side effects and it's going to prevent you from getting COVID. And in Carrie's case, neither of those things was true. And yet they persisted, and to this day persist, in this falsehood that they can make declarative statements about a product that has shown itself to be neither of those things. I don't get it. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Carrie, let me go to you.
So my husband has pointed out to me before that the last time there was like a madness like this with the government was Y2K. When Y2K was going to happen, everyone had to stay home. All the computers were going to shut down. There was going to be chaos and madness and all of this stuff. I remember being freaked out. I still went out, but I remember being freaked out. And they were telling us all this stuff was going to happen, and it didn't.
It didn't. Let me ask you this too, Carrie, because part of what makes me so upset about what happened to you and this rollout and then the mandates and all the kind of the stuff that attended it is there was an element of cruelty around it, right? To dismiss vaccine injured people as not worthy of our love and care and scrutiny is antithetical to the character of this country, as far as I know it. Is that hard for you to adjust your thinking about now?
It is. It's like I was left behind, and you're the dirty little secret. We don't want to talk about it. Here's a little bit of money, but even that was really difficult to get. There was no help, no acknowledgement. Still no acknowledgement.
Wow.
And it's very hard it's psychologically, it's very difficult for me. It is.
Yeah. Does that make it harder for you?
Yeah.
What would you like to happen? What would ease your burden? I mean,
this lady.
Yeah, Eva. Yeah.
And the team that all of a sudden I have all of this support, and it's overwhelming in a good way. The police on guard have stepped in, and they're helping, and I feel like I'm going to get some help. The team has fundraised some funds for me to start seeing a psychologist, which is a huge thing for me. Yeah. I feel like now I'm finally starting to be heard. The word is getting out, but only because Eva has brought this case forward.
Yeah. Well, I always said, from the beginning of COVID, when I knew something was hinky, and was freaking out because there didn't seem to be a way to stop it. We couldn't stop the lockdowns. We couldn't stop them. And I thought, well, the courts are going to sort this out. And for years, they haven't been sorting it out. But it seems like maybe now they are. There was that good judgment in the States this week about it was the Missouri v. Biden case, right? About the Twitter censorship exposing, and the judge injuncted these people from continuing to manipulate the circumstances there. So, everybody shits on lawyers. I don't. I do not. I think that a crusading lawyer can be a really, really good thing in these circumstances. So hats off to Eva. Eva, one of the things I find interesting about what you've done is that you use, if I was reading it correctly, the word colluded to deceive in your filing. What do you mean? Are you talking about the media and government, the media and public health? Who colluded to deceive, and what do you know? What is your explanation of that phrase? Because it's a good one.
Yeah, I think I use the word coordinated just a little bit softer.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
But I do hope that some experts will back me up on how far the coordination, or whether it was collusion. I can't make those allegations until we have, more further evidence. But, we have, like Carrie said, a team of some former investigators. They're helping to gather all of the messaging that went for 3 years. And, it's easy to forget. And I think lots of us want to forget. And actually, I think, unfortunately, the majority of Canadians are there. So we're hoping that this will help raise awareness and get people to understand why we're doing what we're doing. But they just couldn't believe, looking back at the last 3 years, the messaging. And I think that if we go back in time, we're all going to be surprised by that again. And that's where we're going to really see the coordinated effort. So what I alleging in the statement of claim is that nobody was fact checking. Nobody was ensuring that they were making correct statements. They were just all parroting off of each other in a coordinated effort.
Why? I mean, is this a noble lie in a sense? Do you think that they were good people who were so scared of the virus that they needed to believe that they had a panacea and that everybody had to do it, that their critical thinking faculties were turned off by their own fear campaign? I mean, I know it's a tough question because it's kind of asking for motive a bit, and we don't always do that. But I guess I'm asking on a human level because this is such a catastrophe for people.
I think they started off with good intentions and then it turned into greed and a money grab.
Yeah. Eva?
Yeah, I have a hard time figuring out what's going on. And I spent quite a bit of time in Ottawa for a few different reasons this year. And I actually graduated from law school in Ottawa. And looking at what goes on there, I really, really find that the officials, bureaucrats and elected officials, and you could kind of see it on television, but they are living in a bubble. They live in a bubble where I don't think they're connected with Canadians. And I think that given the fact too that Canada is a really big country and not a huge population, so they're insulated and isolated from people. And I think they think they're doing the right thing. I think, but I can't be certain. But what I do see is that they're just so out of touch with regular Canadians and what Canadians need. And I think that's where there's a whole, surprise, surprise, a whole bunch of people end up going to Ottawa during this because they just can't stomach what their government is saying anymore, basically.
Yeah, I talked to Jay Bhattacharya about the idea of the noble lie, and he said there's no place for it in public health. If you're going to do a bad thing for a good reason, it's still a bad thing, and you can't. Yes. Many horror stories have been raised on that idea. I think what's really, really interesting and kind of next level thinking is that you've named the CBC as a defendant in this filing. So tell me why you did that.
Well, who was pushing out the message on behalf of the public health authorities and agents? CBC is the national broadcaster. They're paid by taxpayers. They need to ensure that their message is truthful and accurate, and they didn't do that. So what's their responsibility here? And what's very interesting is obviously I had to read through the Broadcasting Act. And I don't know, Trish, if you've read that in a while or ever, but there's actually no obligation on the CBC to report factual information. There's an obligation through the Canadian Broadcasting Act that they're inclusive. That's a legal obligation. But there is no legal obligation on the CBC to provide accurate or truthful information.
Have you ever looked at the journalistic handbook from CBC? You should get that.
So what I've seen is the ethics and, all these catchy phrases that they put up on websites, the journalist ethics and responsibility. And those are all wonderful things. And you need to be accurate. And they have acronyms and it's a nice fancy page. But none of that is a legal obligation. So this is where we're going to probably come up with and this is why many lawyers haven't gone this way, because the first thing CBC is going to do is, we had no obligation to provide truthful information. That's not the legal obligation, but that's why we're suggesting this is a coordinated effort. And also through the Food and Drugs Act, there is a legal obligation not to present false and misleading information about therapeutic drugs. And in this case, that's what we believe happened, that there was false and misleading information about the COVID-19 vaccine.
So that's interesting, because if the CBC is not compelled by law to strive to prevent true information, then it's false advertising. They should have then a crawl at the bottom of the screen that says, we're not under an obligation to be telling you the truth right now, and just let that scroll, because the people who consume what happens at CBC as a news product, or whatever we're going to call content, I guess we say these days, think that they're working hard to bring them the truth. They average, I'm sure every single ad of a new show, they say, we're bringing you the facts and we're bringing you the truth. That's what they say when they want us to watch. So what is it, people? Like, that becomes false advertising then if they're not doing it. And that's fine. Call yourself an opinion place, or call yourself an arm of the state, whatever you prefer, but news is not it. And that's because I'm old school, right? But we're supposed to be the bulwark between bad science or faulty products and the public. When the regulatory agencies fail or are captured, it's the journalist's job to say, wait a minute, we got, hold on here. And frequently with the help of lawyers like you who give us your discovery so we can make good stories, but right. But we don't have that now. Everybody seems to have if I can say a phrase that sounds paranoid, but they sound like they're all in on it in a sense, right?
Like I said, when I got out of the hospital, my husband and I started reaching out to all these people. I had one person, Lee Harding. He did an article, and that's a whole other story. You can look into that online, but he went through a lot with his, with the company, the newspaper. And, I believe he was let go for, I think it was 4 or 5 months, and then he worked his way back in, I think is how it goes. But he faced a lot of repercussions for trying to report on these kind of things, but he was trying, and he did get the word out. Eventually they did do a story on me, but they were the only ones.
Yeah. Well, it's quite interesting because this is a period of time also where they say anecdotal stories are not evidence and we shouldn't touch them. But anecdotal stories were told about everybody who died of COVID that, was an outlier, right? Like, they pick and choose when anecdotes are actually evidence. But Eva, so what do you feel confident that you may have some success with the suing of reporters angle of this, or is there going to be a big hypocritical free speech freak out about it?
I don't anticipate anything about this lawsuit to be easy.
Yeah.
What happened over the last 3 years, anything to do with COVID, is something we haven't seen before. And the lawsuit is also something we haven't seen before. You mentioned earlier product liability. That's what you were doing. And that's not how this case is framed at all. Because it wasn't Pfizer that was saying, take our drug, take our vaccine, it's good for you, it will help you. It was our government. Yeah. It was our government and health authorities and agents. And then that message was received through the mainstream media mainly. So it's framed in a different way. And as a result, anytime there's something new in court, it takes a lot more effort to help the court understand what it is. So we anticipate a lot of work. We're going to have a lot of experts, including not just anything vaccine related, but psychologically, the manipulation, the coordination, the behavioral changes that the government was working on, as you mentioned. So that kind of evidence is going to be presented in court ultimately.
Yeah, and what do you need? Like, so you've made this filing. What is the next step? Obviously, you've got to fundraise. So let's just stop here and tell them how, if people want to support this, what they can do. I always want to do that. Now, journalists aren't supposed to do it, but we live in new times. I'm fundraising for people who need money. So what is is it a GoFundMe or is it something else?
Yeah, well, it's a Give, Send, Go. GoFundMe is never allowed again, Trish.
Right, I forgot. How could I be so silly? Yeah.
But we're actually likely going to switch it over because we're doing it through 2 organizations. One is called Empowered Canadians, and the mission and goal of that organization is, as it's called, Empower Canadians. And so there'll be a donation box there, and you could go to the website and find out more information. We're also working with a charitable organization called Institute for Freedom and Justice, so you could get a tax receipt there. And like you did say, this is going to cost a fair bit of money, and where we see a lot of the initial costs is going to be for expert fees, where they're going to be assessing these things and presenting that kind of evidence to court.
I think there's been a shift because I know when some of the other cases were litigated, the judges seemed very, very happy to defer to public health.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're feeling that way anymore. I mean, I'm sure some of them still will, but I think this is maybe a new day and that you have a shot at this. And it's actually quite clever, too, because Pfizer and AstraZeneca, are you blaming a specific product? Are you blaming Pfizer? If you were asked that question, what do you think? Or do you avoid that for legal reasons? I don't know. What do you think?
In the filing to the vaccine injury program, the doctors identified it, from my knowledge and understanding, as a Pfizer-related.
Okay. Are you not suing the vaccine manufacturers because they are indemnified, because that you can't, or is there another reason?
That is one of the reasons for sure. They are, as far as we know, because we haven't seen those contracts, and I know lots of MPs have been asking for them, that they're fully indemnified or partially, but regardless. Also, another thing is, this is already an intimidating process. We're suing the government, we're suing the CBC, and then to add a layer of, and we know how litigious they can be, and these are billion-dollar companies that have a lot of money and things at stake. So it's like, here we have Carrie Sakamoto, mother of 3 from Lethbridge, taking on already government and officials. Another layer of these large pharmaceutical companies. And I think that's
scary. They have so much money and so much power now that, I'm sure your life would not be better for having done it, even if you won. It's like, how horrible do I want my life to be over the next few years, right?
To add one more point is, again, it wasn't Pfizer and Moderna that were running around the countryside imploring and coercing Canadians to take the vaccine. That is on our government officials, our public health authorities, and the mainstream media, particularly CBC, because it is the national broadcaster. So they're the ones that relayed that message.
I want you to get them to answer a question for me that I've been asking on this show since the vaccines were released and pushed on the country. Why didn't the government do a risk-benefit ratio? In other words, you got a kind of a tricky vaccine. Old people with comorbidities die. Everybody else, hardly anybody else does. Why not just restrict the use of the vaccine to the people who will die if they don't get it, if in fact it actually works? But let's just operate under that umbrella that it did work or could have worked for those people. Why not just restrict it to them? Why do you think, and I know you're speculating here, but why do you think they mandated it for everybody, and children and adults and healthy people and my basketball playing kids who are, the healthiest specimens on the planet? Like, why would they do that instead of being, in my opinion, prudent in the way they utilize this experimental, not well-tested product?
Very good question. And like I did mention before, the test was for the approval of the vaccine that there's more benefit than there is harm.
Right.
That was what they were operating on. But the question is, what was the evidence to support that? And that's what we're going to have to find out through the court process.
So what's next for you, Carrie? How much better can you get from how you are now? I know you said there was damage and maybe personal permanent damage, but what's the next step for you? Do you feel empowered by the lawsuit, at least?
I do. Like I mentioned earlier, now I have this really big support system that I didn't have access to before. I'm so fortunate. There's so many out there like me that are stuck in place. They don't have any help. And I'm sorry, I forget what the question was.
Well, just what next steps were. But let me, can you work, Carrie? Like, what is your life like now, and how is it different than it was before? Maybe is a good question.
So it's 100% completely different from what my life was before.
Yeah.
I'm that mom. We ski. We live near the mountains, so we ski all winter, winter sports. And then in the summer, we like to go boating and water skiing and that kind of things. And I get out of bed every day. I get dressed, but I'm on very strong medications that try to keep me in bed. I have very bad balance. My memory suffers. I can't drive right now. So really, I'm just stuck at home, just like I was if I was isolated from COVID.
Wow. How old are your kids, Carrie?
So I have a 21-year-old, and he lives in Calgary, actually.
Yeah.
But he was living at home at the time when this happened. And then I have, and his name's Parker. I have a almost 16-year-old named Quentin, and I have a 13-year-old named Lennon.
And how are they coping? Are they supportive?
They are, everybody around me, anyone who knows me is supportive. My kids have suffered a lot. I won't say which one because I don't want them to face any ridicule in the future, but one of my children I've had to homeschool for 3 years now. He has social anxiety. He has stomach ulcers. He's a child. He has separation anxiety from me, and I believe that stems from not being able to see me. I was, like I said, an active mother, and all of a sudden I was in hospital fighting for my life, and my children couldn't see me.
Yeah. Wow. That's tough, isn't it?
Yeah. It's been really hard.
I'm sorry. And he's struggling. He's got anxiety and ulcers. You know what? Hey, kids, so do I. It's been right.
Yeah.
Like we all do. Like this is, I'm not in any way diminishing what happened to him. I think it's horrible, but what they've done to us is, it's unforgivable. I can't even believe it. Can you believe it, Eva? We're looking back on what has happened to this country. I mean,
no, I honestly have chills thinking about it right now. And like, again, that's part of the reason you asked earlier, why now? Well, we need some accountability here. We need somebody to be held responsible for at least what happened to Carrie. And I know there's a lot of people out there that are similar to Carrie or experience things differently, like, you know, yourself. But if we could get accountability and an acknowledgement of responsibility for one person, I would hope that in the future that does something so that we don't see this again in our lifetime or ever.
Yeah, this is, in my view, a big betrayal. You know, Carrie, I feel like the country's let you down. I that's how I feel. This country of kind Canadians, we're known around the world as these kind and wonderful people, and I don't feel that way anymore. And part of it is
they turned on me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but before I forget, I feel like they turned on me. I was this person who believed in my government, and I followed exactly what they said to do. Mm-hmm. I felt betrayed. My government was telling me to do something, and I always trusted them and followed. I thought what they were saying is what I should do. And that's what I did. And now this has happened to me. And they talk about the science. Well, what about the science of people like me who've been injured? Why aren't they acknowledging the science of that? Why isn't anybody studying me to see what the heck happened? Like, so it doesn't happen to other people. Like, where's their science?
Yeah, you said they turned on you, Carrie. Could you just, I just wanted you to finish that thought when you said they've turned on you.
I felt like I was a part of this. It was my community, and these were my beliefs, and I got the vaccine, and then my community didn't believe me, for one. And I am still labeled misinformation, even though I went through the government program and it has been proven that this is what happened to me. But because my government is not stepping up and saying this is what's happened, I'm being labeled as misinformation. And I get not a lot, but I get some hate, and it can be difficult. I have a presence on TikTok, and some of the things I've been told are really awful. Some views that these people I thought were my friends and community were saying too bad. Too bad. It didn't happen to me. So, yeah.
I think maybe if I can say this, and then Eva will let you close for us today. But I think that maybe Carrie and people like Carrie represent something bad that happened in this country that nobody wants to face. And sadly for you, Carrie, you kind of are the physical representation of something really dark that we got to put the sunlight on this now, or our national character is in dire straits, isn't it? We got to look at it. We got to talk about it. We got to fix it, right? Eva?
Yeah, well, definitely. This should, at a minimum, be an opportunity for all of us to learn more about what happened and how we can correct these wrongs that occurred. Carrie's mission, like she said before, was just to raise awareness, and she was shut down for that. So through this lawsuit, through talking about this, through trying to hold the government to account, we hope to help raise awareness, educate Canadians, so that really ultimately it's a better Canada for all of us. I think that's a goal that we could all rally behind.
Yeah, well, good luck with it. I mean it. Stay in touch with us, both of you, would you please, as we follow this through. I mean, the best thing would be actually if it went to trial. I mean, I know that's hard because it's expensive, but to do that, but how wonderful to see these people under oath in a courtroom. I would just absolutely worship that idea if it ever, I would be there sitting in the gallery taking notes. So I kind of hope you get the money and you can do that. Yeah, you're crossing your fingers, Carrie. Yeah, me too. Okay, guys, thanks very much. And do stay in touch. I mean it. We're going to follow this case along. Thank you so much for doing it. And Carrie, good luck to you.
Thank you. Thank you for your support and giving us a platform.
Happy to. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. That was Eva Chipiuk and Carrie Sakamoto. I just want to read the cover page of their statement of claim, their filing, as it's called. It's Court of King's Bench, Alberta, Lethbridge, plaintiff Carrie Sakamoto. And here are the defendants: the Attorney General of Canada, Minister of Health, Chief Public Health Officer of Canada, Public Health Agency of Canada, Dr. Celia Lorenko, I don't know who that is, Alberta Health Services, Jane Doe 1, Jane Doe 2, who I believe were the people who gave Carrie the vaccine, and the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. So this groundbreaking case, and we will follow it. I cannot believe how mean people are being to the vaccine injured in this country. Stop it. Stop it. Even if you were a total vaccine booster, whether you still support it or you feel like a fool for supporting it, these people were harmed by the product and they deserve our love and care. So stop being weirdos about it and step up. Even if you disagree with all kinds of other stuff around people who didn't take the vaccine or criticize the vaccine, these people are harmed. And it's un-Canadian to behave the way you're behaving. So knock it off. Okay, here I go. Being very mumsy there for a minute. Okay, so our next interview is Shawn Buckley, who was here about 5 minutes ago talking about the National Citizens Inquiry. I never have people on that soon after, but then this Bill C-47 deal happened. I have to tell you again, it's something else I was not following. As I say to Shawn, you know, my hard drive brain only has so much space left. There's so much going on in the world. Do I have to figure out the riots in France? I've got to figure out what's going on in Ukraine. I mean, it's just really hard. So this one slipped by me. But you see, you guys keep me honest. And in the comments for the Ask Me Anything, many people said, you got to talk to Shawn about this. And boy, you are right. This is a bill that's a larger, what they call an omnibus bill, in which a very unpopular way of regulating natural products and remedies was slipped in, right? There's none of this stuff is above board. And I have to tell you, that really makes me a bit nuts. You know, this is a democracy. We don't slip things in. We debate and discuss. But apparently they knew it was unpopular, so in it goes. And then the next thing you know, you're dealing with a big problem. So that is what Shawn is here. Shawn is a lawyer which is why he always sounds so smart, who is on top of a lot of these issues. So he is leading the charge against this move by the government to limit our access to natural products in various ways. And it sounds like even punish the industry for existing. It's quite shocking. Anyway, here's my interview with Shawn Buckley. Hi, Shawn. How are you?
I'm really good, Trish. How are you doing?
I'm great. Nice to have you back so soon. You were just here.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me back. This other issue is pretty important.
Yeah, no worries. I'm always happy to give some airtime to stuff that is emerging quickly, in Canada and the world. And this seems like it is. I will confess to you, I seem to be saying this a lot lately. I wasn't following this. My hard drive, I think everybody feels the same way. My hard drive, my brain, is only capable of deep diving so many nutty things that are happening right now. So lots of important stuff just blows right by. And then I realize it's happened and I'm like, oh, and you know what? I'm on media every day and I miss this. So boo. You know how I got it? On my Substack, my readers said, you got to do this. You've got to talk about Bill C-47. So here we are. And I'm embarrassed to say I don't know more. So if I'm asking questions that are too rudimentary, forgive me. So I guess I think the interesting, first of all, maybe we'll start by having you give a kind of a declarative outline of what is wrong with the bill and how it will impede people's ability to access natural products. We'll get into the kind of skullduggery around the passage of it later, but just give me the kind of Cole's Notes version on what this will do to our access to these products.
So the first thing to understand, Trish, is that this Bill C-47 is just one of about 7 steps that Health Canada has outlined in what they call the self-care framework. So when we talk about this bill, it's only one part of a wider framework, and there's other parts that are falling into place right now, and it's collectively that's going to create the problem. So this Bill C-47, which is just our budget bill, but they snuck in changes to the Food and Drug Act, it's going to impose on the natural health industry. It's going to give Health Canada broad powers, but more importantly, it's increasing the fine structure to such an extent that we're in tyranny zone. So we're going from $5,000 a day or an offense to $5 million per day of any violation, and not just the company, but any officers, employees, and directors, managers, etc., are all personally liable for the similar fines. So we're in the zone. Like, a $5 million a day fine for a chemical drug company, that's pocket change. But for any natural health product industry, that is, you're out of business. So we've gone into the zone where, a lawyer would say, well, this is pure tyranny, because you can't even argue now with Health Canada and say what they're doing is reckless or may lead to poor health outcomes. And I can tell you, I've had files where Health Canada's caused deaths and where clients resisting Health Canada has saved lives. So you can't assume that some bureaucrat with no health training can make good health decisions when they say, oh, you have to remove a product from the market.
Okay, let me basically, there's lots to unpack there, but basically when you say natural health products, what are you describing? What categories live in that description? Yeah,
so a natural health product is basically anything therapeutic that is made from plants and minerals. So when you go to a natural health practitioner, like a naturopathic doctor or a traditional Chinese practitioner or a herbalist or homeopathic doctor, those are all natural health products that they're going to use to help you. If you go into a health food store and buy a product, it's going to be a natural health product. So basically anything that's a non-chemical drug, and all natural health products are non-prescription. So they're in a class where you don't need to be managed by a doctor. It's not in that risk category.
So does this include vitamins off the shelf in the drugstore?
It does. Now, we're always going to have vitamins because for political reasons, you can't take vitamins away. They're too ingrained in our culture. But what you can do is you can make sure that the amounts in the vitamins, if somebody follows the label, are at levels that are non-therapeutic. And the problem with this whole self-care framework is these fines are just one part. Another part is they're bringing in cost recovery. So they're going to impose the chemical drug fees upon the industry. And then what they're doing is they're saying, well, we're going to create a new enforcement arm because we're we want to regulate the natural products the same as the chemical drugs. So we're increasing the regulatory burden, and we want inspectors there on the ground to make sure that you're complying. But more importantly, they want inspectors to be going out into the marketplace and seeing if people are sharing truthful health information that they're not allowed to share. And it's important that I do say truthful health information. Health Canada is not going to couch it that way. But we have a fraud provision in the Food and Drug Act. We have a fraud provision in the Criminal Code. We have fraud provisions in our telecommunications law. Everyone's protected against fraud, and we all agree you shouldn't be lying out there in the marketplace.
Okay, so just since it doesn't include vitamins off the shelf, then what products
Well, it does include them, Trish. I'm just saying at the end of the day, we're going to have vitamins in, very low amounts for political reasons.
Yes,
so
I see.
It does include vitamins.
Okay, but name the other things that may be impacted that we won't be able to get, or that will be severely restricted in one way or another. How will that play out?
Well, most of the industry is not. Most of the products out there in your health food store are not just strictly vitamins. I mean, they're combinations of different plants and vitamins and minerals mixed up into multi-combination products for specific conditions.
Yeah,
and those are the products that we're going to lose. The products for specific conditions. So, for example, Health Canada is saying, well, when we get to the end of this self-care framework, you're going to lose the right to use traditional use evidence to support efficacy claims. Well, a large part of the natural health product industry is based on traditional evidence, and some of the traditional traditions, like the traditional Chinese practitioners or the herbalists, I mean, that traditional use evidence goes back, thousands of years. So these products have been safely used for thousands of years for specific conditions because they work for those conditions. But they want us to basically run clinical trials now to do this. And there's no intellectual property rights. So those clinical trials aren't going to be done and the products will disappear. But they also don't want these products to be used for any conditions for which you'd seek the advice of a healthcare practitioner. So they want to limit us to basically over-the-counter use, which is why they're calling them self-care. So they're saying, look, once we come out with these new regulations and you're regulated the exact same way as chemical drugs, this is not for conditions for which you would seek medical advice. Well, then you have to go through the new drug approval process, and there's never been a natural health product in history that's gone through that process because it costs about $1 billion. You have to have you have to have a patent with a good shelf life on it to go through the process. You just wouldn't spend the money, and you wouldn't be able to raise the money. So everyone like me in the industry understands that we're basically moving to where we're going to lose most of our products and just be in a chemical drug model at the end, and that's the goal.
Yeah. So let me ask you what is behind this? Like the bills that kind of sneak out, like this feels very sneaky. And they wrap it in, I guess they're wrapping this in a safety profile issue, knowing them, right? Is that what they're doing?
Yeah. So when you say this is sneaky, so Health Canada first tried to do this in 2008 for people in the industry at the time. When I say Bill C-51, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So this is Bill C-51. There was basically the largest citizen rebellion I've ever experienced on an issue. And everyone in the federal bureaucracy that was there in 2008, they know the word Bill C-51. I mean, it's legendary. So Health Canada knew, and the Ministry of Health knew, that there's no way Canadians wanted these powers and penalties imposed on natural health products. So that was defeated in 2008. Like, the government backed down and didn't reintroduce the bill. In 2014, these exact same powers and penalties were imposed on the chemical drug industry through what's called Vanessa's Law. And nobody really cared. We don't care if Pfizer faces a $5 million a day fine, for example. But, knowing that no one wanted these imposed on natural health companies, Health Canada snuck it into the budget bill. So it's literally sections 500 to 504 of Bill C-45, the budget bill, which is now passed. So basically that bill doesn't go to the Standing Committee of Health, and nobody realized what was happening, and now all of a sudden it's law. So it was very sneaky. So the one issue in my lifetime that has enraged Canadians more than any other issue Health Canada and the Ministry of Health deliberately snuck into the budget bill to get it passed. And it's curious, they sent an email the following day. They were ready to the natural health industry. Like, they've got everyone's emails, people that applied for product licenses and site licenses, and let them know that these new powers and penalties apply. And I can already give you an example of censorship that's happening because of this.
Please do. Yeah.
So there's a company called True Hope that has a product called Empower Plus, which I can tell you, in my opinion, from having to defend them in court against Health Canada and call world-class psychiatrists like Dr. Charles Popper, who's a psychiatrist at Harvard Medical School that just teaches doctors to become psychiatrists, and who set up for their two regulatory boards that will certify child and adolescent psychiatrists. He set up their standards, and he's also the founding editor of the Journal of Child and Adolescent Psychopharmacology. I mean, he basically said on the stand, and he's just one example, like, if I got bipolar disorder, this is what I would use. And it just he explained to the court it destroyed his practice, because basically, half his patients tried it, and if it works, and it works for 8 out of 10 people with bipolar disorder, you just get well. Like, he doesn't even have to manage them, right?
Yeah.
Literally, he said, because he gets the worst of the worst, that he would meet with every patient every week to, manage their side effects and to counsel them not to commit suicide that week. And then after half his patients were in Empower Plus, he'd meet with them not weekly, every 3 to 6 months. Wow. And basically have coffee. So this company, there's 35 published peer review research articles. Listen, Trish, all funded by governments across the world. So this is government money, governments researching a product and, published in blue chip journals like the Journal of Psychiatry. Like, we're talking high level research. The government of Alberta stumped up over $500,000 for a double blind clinical trial. Like, this is a product governments have gotten behind. And prior to these penalties being imposed, True Hope had links to those 35 studies on their website, because even though Health Canada takes the position, without there being any legislative authority, they take the position you can't let people know stuff like that's out there. All you can say is the approved label claim, which is something like supports mental health and well-being. Well, now that there's $5 million a day fines, True Hope has taken that down. And, I think of naturopathic doctors as a group. They're advertisers. They advertise treatments for specific conditions. Well, they're not allowed to do that according to Health Canada. So we're going to enter a whole new world of censorship, because they're going to use the cost recovery to create an enforcement arm to go out and censor. And whereas before you could withstand $5,000 in offense fines, with $5 million per day fines, they basically own you. So we're entering a significant and brave new world of censorship, but that's necessary if you're going to take treatments away from people, if you don't know something's going to work for you.
But if a product has been studied the way this, is it Empower Plus? Is that what you said?
It's just the word Empower Plus, but for whatever reason they pronounce it Empower. So
okay, so and you suggest that there's quite good evidence that it does what it is being proclaimed to do. Why? I don't understand why that's a problem. Why would that be a problem if the studies and the commentary was in the realm of what we consider credible science? What do they want more than that? Why would they censor people saying, well, I know why they censor, but give me your answer to that question.
Well, I mean, it's a policy decision, because there's nowhere in the Food and Drug Act or regulations that say you can't advertise beyond the label claim. You just can't be fraudulent. And it kind of raises a different question. And, we can get to, the risk profile later, just to show how ridiculous Health Canada is. Yeah. But, when the Empower Plus started, it started because one of the founders' wife had severe bipolar and committed suicide. And two of his children were, his one daughter was in and out of the psych wards, involuntarily committed. And
terrible
he and
condition.
This other fellow just came to believe that nutrition could affect mental health. Yeah. And they stumble across, they do a whole bunch of research and then just basically have a product created. Ironically, by another company they were not interested in selling until they had to have control of the formula for consistency. But at the beginning, we had people that were the cohort of bipolar disorder people that are involuntarily committed to psych wards about half of their life. That cohort doesn't live, beyond the 5-year mark once they're in it, like just statistically. And at first, it was people like that who word of mouth. So all the approved treatments had failed them. And when they started this protocol, they knew it was experimental. Like they knew it was, I won't say largely anecdotal evidence, because the company was, you were being charted every day. It was one of the conditions because they were trying to learn this.
Yeah.
Well, what's wrong with a competent adult who all the official treatments have not worked? Just being truthfully told, hey, this is what we do have. This is the reactions we are having. It's largely anecdotal. Well, it's not. Again, they were charting everything. But what's wrong with trying a vitamin mineral supplement when nothing else is working?
But see, we've just interrupt for a second, because this feels like the same old song that we've been singing about Tony Fauci, who, when I was covering Fauci back in the 80s around AIDS, and the guys were dropping like flies of these gruesome deaths, there was stuff, even regular pharmaceuticals prescribed off label, that he would not support. Fauci would not support prescribing things like Bactrim, right, which have a very good safety profile when people are dying. They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. It's like a last chance drug for some people. We know how awful bipolar disease is. It's a grim prognosis for many people and many families. So why not let them do something that's not going to hurt them anyway, right? I mean, I just don't understand that.
Well, I mean, I've been on this topic since 1994, and ironically, I got into it acting as counsel for Health Canada. Against a herbalist. So, I mean, I was on the other side at first.
Yeah, interesting.
And on the inside, there's basically hatred towards the natural health product industry. But I mean, I think it's regulatory capture, and I also think it's just simple human nature. I mean, most of Health Canada's budget comes from the pharmaceutical companies in the form of fees, and just subconsciously, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. And then I don't know if you're aware of Dr. Shiv Chopra. He's deceased now, but he was a drug approval scientist at Health Canada for 3 decades. And he became a whistleblower. He actually caused the Senate to call, I think, 5 drug approval scientists, himself included, about, basically corruption at Health Canada.
Yeah.
And I remember Dr. Margaret Hayden gave an interview to the CBC after her testimony. And she basically said, after you've been at Health Canada for a while as a drug approval scientist, you understand how they're going to get around your decision not to approve a drug, because you've concluded as the expert that, it's not safe enough and it doesn't work enough to justify, being used in Canada. And then what the management will do is and the management are never doctors or scientists, they will appoint a panel of outside experts who usually are connected to the pharmaceutical companies, who then the outside experts, and you don't know who voted for it, just as a committee, they vote to approve it. So they have no liability.
Yeah.
And then the management, following the recommendation of outside experts, they have no liability. This is really clever. And the drug gets appointed over the objections of Health Canada's own drug approval scientists who say, this is not in the public interest to approve this. And,
can I say something about that? And I can't elaborate because there was a lawsuit over it. But I did a story on that very thing when I was at the Fifth Estate. And we had a whistleblower named Michelle Brill-Edwards talking about that. And we were sued over it and we lost. And I am prevented from talking about it. But I understand very well the case that you are making. I literally can't talk about it. I cannot talk about it.
Right, you're under a court order.
well, it's we lost the lawsuit, so anything I say could incur more damages against the CBC and me.
Right, but it's interesting because Michelle Brill-Edwards, who was a Health Canada scientist, she publicly criticized the model that we have to regulate natural health products because it's basically just a paper model. So it imposes, tremendous cost and busyness on the industry, without real on the ground testing. But the whole premise that natural health products are so dangerous that we need ever stricter regulation is, actually just a false argument. So Health Canada will, come out, and it's funny, they had the Auditor General, and when I say they had, I mean, help me out here. So in 2017, Health Canada comes out with a self-care framework and says we need to impose these strict penalties on the natural health product industry, and we need cost recovery. And then COVID happens, and now we're through COVID, and the Auditor General does a report on natural health products saying we need, stricter penalties and cost recovery. And they never actually do a deep dive. Well, what's the risk of taking natural products away? Because every time you increase a regulatory burden in any field, you reduce the access to products. I mean, it's just cause and effect. You increase the cost to companies, and you have fewer products and fewer competition, right?
Does this impact quality control at all? Like, I'll play devil's advocate just for a minute, if you don't mind, and say, how do you police the natural products industry not becoming a Wild West where shysters can kind of take advantage of the situation there? How do you prevent that?
So let me turn that around, because now again we're not taking into account, well, what's the danger of removing products? So we didn't have any regulation of natural health products till July 1st of 2004. That's when our natural health product regulations came in. So prior to that, it was the Wild West. Now, I just wrote a discussion paper on this what's happening right now, and it can be found at www.nhppa.org. Now, I pulled for that discussion paper, and I included as the last page a table from a risk analysis that Professor Ron Law did in 2004. So this is when we have no regulations. And so he's using Canadian government statistics largely. He's also using statistics from other Western nations to have a wider pull. Yeah. But so using government statistics in 2004, so largely Canadian government statistics in 2004, when they're totally unregulated, like everything in a health food store is unregulated. Did you know that in 2000, and just the point I'm trying to make is if stricter regulations make us safer, well, we have way stricter regulations right now than we had in 2004. We had no regulations. So we're way stricter. So using 2004 figures, when it's the Wild West, you were 14 times more likely to be struck by lightning, Trish, than you were to be harmed by natural health products. Wow. You're 428 times more likely to die bicycling than to die from natural health products. You are 714 times more likely to die in a school bus accident than to, be killed by a natural health product. You're 1,071 times more likely to be murdered in Canada than to die from a natural health product. Not a single one of us would give any freedom up to be protected by lightning, and yet you're 14 times more likely to be struck by lightning. 14 times is such a significant difference, it's not even fair to use lightning strikes as a comparison.
I get it.
Yeah. So I mean, so when we're talking about risk, that's a paper tiger. But a lot of Canadians, I spoke about eMpower Plus. Well, Health Canada charged that company criminally with selling without a license back when you couldn't get a license. Mm-hmm. And the court found that it was legally necessary. They said, well, True Hope, you were selling without a license. You're guilty of that. But we can't convict you because of the legal doctrine of necessity. Because if you had done what Health Canada said, there would have been more deaths. I called as a witness there was lots of evidence of death in the case, but one of the witnesses I called was Ron Lajeunesse. He had been deputy minister in Alberta and had set up all the mental health programs in Alberta, a real heavy hitter in mental health. And then he moved on to be president of the Alberta branch of the Canadian Mental Health Association. He would hold press conferences every time there was a death of a Canadian Mental Health Association member because Health Canada was restricting access to this product in an effort to shame Health Canada. So here, and I called witness after witness after witness who, said I would have committed suicide. Trish, when I started interviewing the people that, had found relief from eMpower Plus to figure out who I was going to call as a witness, 100% of them volunteered something during the interview that hadn't even occurred for me to ask. And what they explained to me was, I had a suicide plan in place. If I was going to run out, I was going to kill myself before I ran out, because I wasn't willing to go back to living the way I was. Like, it was just a living hell under the chemical pharmaceutical drugs that was approved. And I wasn't willing to go back to that. I had every single 100% of the people I interviewed told me that they volunteered it. It wasn't on my question list. And the ones I called explained that to the court. So I'm just trying to make the point. You have to understand it's not a zero-sum game. You can't just say, oh, well, there's a risk, we need to regulate them in a way that's going to take many off the market.
Yep.
People are using these products because they work. And the curious thing in the natural health product industry is, and less so now because it's harder to innovate with the stricter regulations, but it used to be a company would come out with, a new combination of herbs and minerals and the like to treat a condition. And if it didn't work, it would just disappear because, the people that tried it, didn't find it effective and they wouldn't buy it again. But if it worked, then it would just take off, and then you'd have other companies kind of emulate the product because we don't have intellectual property rights. And the marketplace was really good at kind of winnowing out what worked and didn't work, and then the practitioners would pay attention too. So, you actually had a pretty vibrant industry. And, if you talk like works and doesn't work, you also then have to be fair, like the chemical pharmaceutical drugs, they don't work for most people for the conditions for which they're approved. What are we talking about here, right? Like there is trial and error for everyone when they have a health crisis. For many, it's a journey to, find out what works for them. And the difficulty is we're moving into a world that Health Canada is forcing us into where that journey you won't have a path to try natural health products.
Well, and there's a massive kind of elephant in the room of irony when we're discussing natural products and these strict new rules around them in the age of COVID vaccines that didn't meet any of those criteria anyway, and were actually mandated. Like, it's almost sickening to think about the hypocrisy in their defense of a pharmaceutical company for a product that's neither safe nor effective versus this industry, which is sort of doing its best to fill in the gaps where the pharmaceutical stuff is failing. Right? It's just, I can't even contemplate how hypocritical this is for Health Canada. Shame on them. I bet they don't have any natural product people sitting on their panels, do they?
Well, this framework, and it's important to understand, like in 97, 98, the citizens rebelled because Health Canada was using the drug regulations to drive products off the market, and ironically was bringing in the same cost recovery we're fighting over today. And the Minister of Health at the time, Alan Rock, publicly backed down the day before the lawsuit was to start, and referred the matter to the Standing Committee on Health. So the Standing Committee of Health is just an all-party committee in Parliament with, some expertise on health matters. And so any health bill gets referred to them once it passes second reading and goes into committee, and then they, have a look at it and make recommendations before third reading. So the health minister asked the Standing Committee of Health, will you actually seriously look into how the government should regulate natural health products? So this is an all-party committee being asked by the government, have a broad consultations. I think they had over 1,000 witnesses. It was the broadest consultation of any standing committee in Canada's history. And they came out with 53 recommendations. You can still find it on the Parliament website. And they said, you can't regulate these at all the way you regulate chemical drugs. It's completely inappropriate. The risk profile isn't there. It's not justified in any way. And you have to do things like allow traditional use evidence and the like. So then there's a dance with Health Canada. They didn't like this. So that report came out in 98. It wasn't for another 6 years. Health Canada appointed a joint committee that basically came out and said, yeah, let's follow that. They didn't like that, so they had to dance for a while and appoint another committee to get what they wanted. And then they just imposed drug-style regulations on us. And that's been just a bloodbath for the industry, but there's still effective products out there. Not as many, and innovation is down and costs are up. But, we're living with those regulations, and now they want to move us into a drug-style model again. That's been the goal all along. So we've only had the vibrant industry that we have for two reasons. We're beside the United States, which has a rich culture in the use of natural remedies, and we've got this porous border, so it's harder for them to put us into a full European-style model where you have, really truncated products compared to what we have. And it's been public resistance to their thing. But I'll just, you mentioned the vaccine, the COVID vaccine's unsafe and effective. Your listeners can go to the National Citizens Inquiry, the Montreal hearings. I testified at the end of day 2 on the test. And I think your listeners would be surprised to know, despite Health Canada messaging that they're safe and effective, that a substitute test was made just for the COVID vaccines by the Minister of Health. And the word safety isn't even mentioned, let alone it's not a requirement that they be proven safe. And the word efficacy isn't even mentioned. So the COVID-19 vaccines did not have to be proven to be safe, did not have to be proven to be effective. And there's no question from court documents, affidavits in court files that this new test was used. So, so the representations from Health Canada are different from the reality.
Well, and it's like now they're applying some of the standards they should have applied to the vaccine it's ridiculous. But the other part of this story is, I guess it's in part the sneakiness, which we sort of talked about. But what is, okay, so you mentioned there was a huge pushback in the past effort. So what happens now? Where is this regulatory event actually playing out now? Like, has it passed? Has the Senate given it its final?
Oh yeah. So and again, like this Bill C-47. So it got third reading and royal assent on June 22nd. So it's now law, and Health Canada's already imposing it, which is why I used the True Hope example of how already, because of these large penalties, Health Canada is enforcing censorship that they were not able to enforce before. But that's just one plank. So we're also in the middle of cost recovery. Canada has published in the Canada Gazette their cost recovery proposal. Another plank of it is to reduce the regulatory burden for the chemical over-the-counter drugs. So ironically, the very dangerous drugs are getting a reduced regulatory burden when you think it should be increased, but they're reducing it so that they can move natural health products up to the same regulatory standard. What's coming next now is the standards of evidence, same standards of evidence, which will destroy the industry and take products away, and then making it so that you cannot use these products for anything that you would seek the advice of a healthcare practitioner, so that licensing has to move up to the more onerous new drug approval process, which no natural health product has ever gotten through and will ever get through. So it's kind of the final nail to move us to a European model. But this is all about harmonizing Canada with other Western nations so that all the regulations are the same and we're strictly in a chemical model. And it's offensive from a legal philosophical perspective, because if you truly believe that you should have the right to decide how to prevent yourself from getting sick, staying healthy, and have a right to treat yourself, decide how you're going to treat yourself when you're sick, Health Canada's not saying you can't decide, but they're taking away your other options. So it's really scary, Trish. And I think it's important for people to understand that our drug regulation is not about health. So the federal government doesn't have jurisdiction over health. The Food and Drug Act is actually a criminal law power, and with a little bit of international trade power mixed in. And the purpose of our drug regulations is not to protect health. So you actually never see in there, you'll never see in the legislation any duty to tell Health Canada to protect health or to have good public health outcomes. So the purpose is to protect intellectual property rights. Yeah. And in fact, I had a Health Canada inspector on the stand. Ironically, it was in that True Hope case. And I was trying to box her in, to have to say yes to a question, down the road. And so I had a group of questions.
That's a good technique, Shawn. I used to use it at Fifth Estate.
And so I was just expecting to get a yes on all these questions. Like, to me, they were just no-brainer questions. And one of them was something to the effect, and it's just I hadn't learned yet, right? And one of them was something to the effect of, well, as a Health Canada inspector, you're there to protect our health. And I'm just expecting a yes.
Yeah.
And I don't get a yes. And, I keep my poker face up there, like, so that no one knows I'm going, what the heck, inside. And I keep circling around trying to get her to say yes. And then she quite truthfully, because she was under oath, she quite truthfully explains to me and the court that no, as a Health Canada inspector, she's not there to protect our health, and that Health Canada is not there to protect our health. Health Canada is there to enforce the Food and Drug Act and regulations. And now it's just so obvious. Well, of course, Health Canada is there to enforce the Food and Drug Act and regulations. And the Food and Drug Act and regulations don't say protect people's health. They don't say get good health outcomes. They don't say, don't approve drugs if it's not in the public interest. So, let's say a drug company was asking to approve a drug, let's just say, for a new blood thinner. And it was way more dangerous than, the ones already on the market. Well, in the public interest, would you approve it? So there's already ones that work as well on the market with a lower risk profile. Is it in the public interest to approve it? Or if you do approve it, shouldn't there be people have to sign a waiver saying, I acknowledge there are other blood treatments that work as well with lower risk profile. Even the idea, I was, cross-examining a, hired gun from Health Canada in a lawsuit. And this person was a psychiatrist that ran a company that would get psychiatric drugs through the new drug approval process. And this person starts complaining to me on the stand how hard it is to get a new antidepressant on the market. He says, we have to give Health Canada 2 sizable double-blind clinical trials showing the drug works. So showing a statistical separation, within the magic formula with the sugar pill. And he says, so right now we do 8 out of the gate. If my company's hired, we do 8 double-blind clinical trials to get the 2 that show the statistical separation. And they don't even have to show Health Canada the other 6. Well, that's a fraud. And Health Canada knows that's how this works. The whole system, the whole drug approval process is so broken. It's one of the largest frauds perpetrated on any population in history. If you wanted to know if a drug worked, because books are written on how you game a clinical trial and design it to get your outcome. If you wanted a faithful drug approval process in the public interest, it would be that Health Canada would get money from the companies to run 2 double-blind clinical trials.
Yep.
They would publish the study design before independent people are hired to do it. And then they would hire independent, bodies to run these trials. And then they would all be public. And then you would have a reasonable chemical drug approval process. And this is just simple. It's so obvious that what we're doing is a complete fraud. But it's a captured industry, and the purpose is to protect intellectual property rights and make them valuable.
Meaning big pharma. That's what you're saying. I mean, it's quite interesting because one of the things, we got to wrap up here, but I could talk to you as ever all day. But when I see, you were talking about, SSRIs, whatever, antidepressant pills. And when I see as one of the side effects listed suicide, I'm like, well, so you're giving a person who's suicidal a pill that might cause suicide. Have we gone insane? And we're now seeing, of course, there's a lot of pushback against the use of these products, especially in kids. It's way too late. I remember when the Prozac, I think it was Time magazine, put Prozac on the cover as the new miracle pill for depression, right? And it just, everybody, if you went in for, an eye infection, you got a script for Prozac. I mean, it was just unbelievable how this happens. And I fear where we are going. So let me just wrap up with you, Shawn, and find out what needs to be done now. There's a lot of people, I certainly see them in my Substack. They're all talking about this. What needs to be done now? What can be done now?
And I'm glad you're asking that question. So I'm participating with a nonprofit called the Natural Health Product Protection Association. And if your listeners want to write down the website, it's just www.nphpa.org. nhppa.org, and subscribe to our mailing list, because we're starting a campaign actually right now as we speak about how to pressure MPs, where we give you really detailed instructions on what you need to do and educate you on the issues. There's a discussion paper that's quite long. There's also like just a 2-pager to let you know what's going on. There's sampled letters. There's everything to make it easy. And then we're going to just be launching campaign after campaign after campaign, because we need to roll this back, and we need to get ourselves in a situation where we have a reasonable regulatory environment that allows us as consenting and informed adults have our own choice. So please plug in to the NHPPA, because we're spearheading what I'll call the resistance.
Yeah. And I just want to be clear for everybody listening and get an affirmative from Shawn about this. The gist of what you just said is that this bill was discussed before. There was such an outpouring of resistance by the citizenry. They didn't do it. And now they've snuck it in under a bigger bill about something else. This is a real American style, omnibus bills that take 9 years to read. I almost said the F word, and I'm stopping myself, but I'm upset. It's dishonest. Right? It's dishonest. They are going against the will of the people, and they know it by sneaking things through. And we're not, regardless of what you think of it, we're not accepting that. This is a goddamn democracy, and you can't sneak things through because the people don't want it. Sorry, Shawn, that's my...
No, but I'm enraged too. I was heavily involved in resisting this in 2008, and people were passionate about it. And it's just, I know what a train wreck it's going to be. And then, I'm out running the National Citizens Inquiry, and and this is introduced in the budget bill, before the hearings are done, and I can't get things going. So as soon as the NCI finished its hearings, I don't get a break. I'm jumping right into this. But people are already mad, and we're going to roll this back. But we have to do it together. We need your help. We need you to be writing letters. We need you to be calling your MPs. We need you to be meeting, and we'll need you to take other actions. But together we're going to do this, because we have the right to decide how we're going to treat ourselves when we're sick, and we're not going to give that up.
And Big Pharma has enough power over our lives. Who sponsored this bill? Did anybody sponsor? Who's behind this politically? Who could name the people?
I don't know. I actually haven't looked into that. It's the budget bill, so it's just the Minister of Health introducing the budget bill. But why are you sneaking in this change to a budget bill that has nothing to do with the budget?
And where's Pierre Poilievre? Where are all the people who are supposed to be championing the other side? Where are they? Why are they sitting quietly and not having a freak out? I don't understand.
No, it's a good question, because they should know Canadians are touchy about this. So why hasn't any party stood up and said this was unacceptable?
Yeah, and Jagmeet, he's NDP. They're all into these products, aren't they? Don't those people still, this just makes no sense. We're governed by psychopaths or something these days. Anyway, Shawn, thank you for doing this. I'm really grateful, and keep us in the loop. And we'll keep talking about it. Okay.
Super. Well, thank you so much, Trish. I really appreciate your interest in it. Obviously, I'm passionate, and any chance I get, and I so respect what you're doing. So keep up the good work.
Thanks a lot. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thanks, Trish.
Okay. Bye. That was Shawn Buckley on Bill C-47. Another thing we've got to fight about with our government, because we do not live in a democracy anymore. That is clear, isn't it, folks? And we're going to do a lot more talking about that too. I'm working up some stuff on international digital ID and a bunch of other stuff that's pretty scary, and also some positive things for us to focus on too. But Bill C-47 is kind of exemplary of that, isn't it? The next thing you know, a bill nobody wanted is rammed through. How did that happen, right? Okay, I'm going to leave you with it's a little gift. Really. It's a long clip by a guy named Max Blumenthal, who is the kind of senior editor of Grey Zone. I've had him on the show. I know him and like him. We respect each other very much. I don't always agree with his politics, but who cares about that? We're not doing that anymore, right? We're just going with people who have good ideas, even though we don't agree on everything. He gave a tour de force speech at the UN Security Council. I actually do not know the backstory of how that happened, but whoever made that happen, yay. Because in about 11 minutes, I think that's how long his presentation was, he just shut down the absolute corruption, tomfoolery, and danger that attends this absurd Ukraine war that all of our masters are so gung-ho to support and keep going. I mean, I can't think of anybody who's done a better, it's kind of Tucker Carlson-y, it's that good, right? Who does a better takedown of where we're headed and the absolute folly of it, which we've alluded to a lot on the show, with Colonel McGregor and other people who saw this early on, as we did. I'm going to play this for you. It's 11 minutes long. It's Max Blumenthal from the Gray Zone. It's a website, if you're interested in foreign policy, that you should look at. Then I'll come back and say goodbye. But this is an absolutely brilliant takedown of I consider one of the most dangerous public policy moves ever the globalists have done. Because you know why? We're attempting nuclear annihilation. That's what we are doing. And that's what he says. And this is my friend Max Blumenthal.
I now give the floor to Mr. Max Blumenthal.
Thank you. And I thank Alex Rubenstein and Wyatt Reed for helping me prepare this address. Wyatt Reed is a journalistic colleague of mine who in October 2022 happened to be in Donetsk when his hotel was shelled by the Ukrainian military with a apparently U.S.-made howitzer, nearly killing him. He was 100 meters away. I'm also here with my friend, the civil rights activist Randy Kretico, who was more recently in Donetsk and witnessed regular HIMARS attacks on civilian targets. I am here not only as a journalist who has spent over 20 years writing books, producing documentaries, and writing articles about conflict and politics from several continents. I'm also here as an American taxpayer who's been dragooned into funding a proxy war that has become a threat to the regional and international stability at the expense of my countrymen and women. Just June 28th, as emergency crews worked to clean up yet another toxic train derailment in the United States, this time on the Montana River, further exposing our nation's chronically underfunded infrastructure and its threats to our health, the Pentagon announced plans to send an additional $500 million worth of military aid to Ukraine. The development came as Ukraine's army enters the third week of a vaunted counteroffensive that CNN describes as, quote, not meeting expectations, and which even Volodymyr Zelensky says is going slower than desired. As Ukraine's military failed to breach Russia's primary defense line, CNN reported on June 12th that Kiev had lost, quote, lost 16 U.S.-made armored vehicles sent to the country. So what did the Pentagon do? It simply passed that bill down to average U.S. taxpayers like myself, charging us another $325 million to replace Ukraine's squandered military stock. There was zero effort to consult the U.S. public's position on the matter, and the vast majority of Americans likely did not even know the exchange took place. This policy that I'm describing to you, which sees Washington prioritize unrestrained funding for a proxy war with a nuclear power in a foreign land while our domestic infrastructure falls apart before our eyes, exposes a disturbing dynamic at the heart of the Ukraine conflict, an international Ponzi scheme that enables Western elites to seize hard-earned wealth from the hands of average U.S. citizens and funnel it into the coffers of a foreign government that even Transparency International ranks as consistently one of the most corrupt in Europe. The U.S. government has yet to conduct an official audit of its funding for Ukraine. The American public has no idea where their tax dollars are going. And that's why this week, we at the Gray Zone published an independent audit of U.S. tax dollar allocation to Ukraine throughout the fiscal years 2022 and 23. Our investigation was led by Heather Kaiser, a former military intelligence officer who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. We found, among many bizarre payments, a $4.5 million payment from the U.S. Social Security Administration to the Kiev government. We found $4.5 billion worth of payments from the U.S. Agency for International Development to pay off Ukraine's sovereign debt, much of which is owned by the global investment firm BlackRock. That amounts to $30 taken from every U.S. citizen at a time when 4 in 10 Americans cannot afford a $400 emergency. We found tax dollars earmarked for Ukraine, padding the budgets of a television station in Toronto, a pro-NATO think tank in Poland, and believe it or not, even rural farmers in Kenya. We found tens of millions to private equity firms, including one in the Republic of Georgia, as well as $1 million payment to a single private entrepreneur in Kiev. Our audit also revealed the Pentagon's $4.5 million contract with a company called Atlantic Diving Supply to provide Ukraine with unspecified explosives equipment. This is a notoriously corrupt company that none other than Tom Tillis, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, previously lambasted for its, quote, history of fraud. Yet once again, Congress has failed to ensure these shady payments and massive arms deals are properly tracked. In fact, much of the military and humanitarian aid shipped to Ukraine has simply vanished. Last year, CBS News quoted the director of a pro-Zelensky nonprofit in Ukraine who reported that only 30% of aid was reaching the front lines. The embezzlement of funds and supplies is at least as troubling as the potential consequences of the illicit transfer and sales of military-grade weapons. Last June, the head of Interpol warned that the massive transfers of arms into Ukraine means, quote, we can expect an influx of weapons in Europe and beyond, and that criminals are now, as we speak, focusing on them. This May, a group of anti-Kremlin Russian exiles outfitted with gear supplied by the Ukrainian government was hailed by Western politicians for carrying out terrorist attacks in Russian territory using American-made Humvees. Although the group, the so-called Russian Volunteer Corps, is led by a man who calls himself the, quote, White King and includes numerous open admirers of Adolf Hitler, described as neo-Nazis in U.S. mainstream media, the Western weaponization of this militia against Russian forces and Russian civilians has not prompted any outcry from Congress. And while the Biden administration has promised that it's keeping tabs on the weapons sent, a State Department cable leaked last December conceded that, quote, kinetic activity and active combat between Ukrainian and Russian forces create an environment in which standard verification measures are sometimes impracticable or impossible. The Biden administration not only knows that it cannot track the weapons it's shipping to Ukraine, it knows that it is escalating a proxy war against the world's largest nuclear power and daring it to respond in kind. We know this because back in 2014, and this timeline is so important, that's when NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that the war started following a U.S.-backed coup d'etat. President Barack Obama rejected demands from Kiev to send lethal offensive weaponry because, as the Wall Street Journal put it, he had a, quote, long-standing concern that arming Ukraine would provoke Moscow into further escalation that would drag Washington into a proxy war. When Donald Trump entered office in 2017, he attempted to hold the line on Barack Obama's policy, but was soon branded a Russian puppet by the Beltway press corps and the Democratic Party for refusing to send Raytheon's Javelin missiles to the Ukrainian military. His reluctance to send the Javelins became a central theme of his impeachment, and he predictably relented. As U.S.-made offensive weaponry began to reach the front lines of the Donbass, the collective West exploited the Minsk Accords to, quote, give Ukraine time to arm up, as the former German Chancellor Angela Merkel put it. In January 2022, the U.S. announced a $200 million arms package to Ukraine. Follow the timeline. By the 18th of February, observers from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe reported a doubling in ceasefire violations, with OSCE maps showing the overwhelming majority of targeted sites on the side of pro-Russian separatists in Donetsk and Lugansk. 5 days later, Russia invaded Ukraine. And since then, the U.S. and its allies have been scurrying up the escalation ladder at every opportunity. Quote, things we couldn't give in January because it was escalatory were given in February, a former State Department official complained after meeting with Ukrainian counterparts. And things we couldn't give in February, we can in April. That has been the distinct pattern, starting with, for crying out loud, Stingers, referring to shoulder-mounted rockets. Joe Biden himself said in March 2022, the idea that we're going to send in offensive equipment and have planes and tanks, don't kid yourself. No matter what you all say, that's called World War III. Just over a year later, Biden changed his tune, backing a plan to provide F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine, and after pressuring Germany to send in the tanks he once feared would provoke World War III. It would only take 2 months from the time Ukraine received HIMARS, Lockheed-made HIMARS systems for the U.S. For the Ukrainian military to begin targeting critical infrastructure, using them to strike the Antonovsky Bridge over the Dnipro River, and again 2 months later in a test strike on the Kakhovka Dam to see if the Dnipro's water could be raised enough to stymie Russian crossings, as the Washington Post reported. 3 weeks ago, the Kakhovka Dam was destroyed, triggering a major environmental catastrophe that caused mass flooding and contamination of the local water supply. Ukraine, of course, blames Russia for this attack, but has produced no evidence. Around this time, Ukraine also baselessly accused Russia of planning a provocation at the Zaporozhye nuclear plant. This triggered a resolution by Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal, no relation to me, calling for NATO to intervene directly in Ukraine and attack Russia if such an incident occurred. The move by Blumenthal and Graham thus established a de facto red line for initiating U.S. military action, much like the one set down in Syria, which, as a former U.S. diplomat commented to journalist Charles Glass, was an open invitation to a false flag. Will we see another Duma deception, but this time in Zaporozhye? This time with nuclear consequences? Why are we doing this? Why are we tempting nuclear annihilation by flooding Ukraine with advanced weapons and sabotaging negotiations at every turn? We've been told by people like Senator Dick Durbin that Ukraine is literally in a battle for freedom and democracy itself. And therefore, anyone who opposes military aid to Ukraine opposes the very defense of democracy, according to this logic. So where's the democracy in Vladimir Zelensky's decision to ban opposition parties, to criminalize the media outlets of his legitimate political opponents, to jail his top political rival and his deputies, to raid Orthodox churches and jail clergymen? Where is the democracy in the Ukrainian government's imprisonment of Gonzalo Lira, an American citizen, simply for challenging the official narrative of Ukraine's war? And where is the democracy in Zelensky's recent decision to suspend elections in 2024 on the grounds that martial law has been declared? The answer is that Ukrainian democracy is harder to find these days than that country's commander-in-chief, Valery Zaluzhny. Senator Lindsey Graham has offered a much more grim and more on-the-mark rationale for supplying Ukraine with billions in weapons. As the senator boasted during a recent visit with Zelensky in Kiev, the Russians are dying. It's the best money we've ever spent. I repeat, the Russians are dying. It's the best money we've ever spent. And Graham has also said that Americans are ready to fight this war down to the last Ukrainian. While official casualty numbers are strictly classified, we must worry that Ukraine is well on its way to fulfilling the senator's ghoulish fantasies. As a Ukrainian soldier complained this month to Vice News, we don't know what Zelensky's plans are, but, quote, it looks like the extermination of its own population, like of the combat-ready and working-age population. That's it. Indeed, military cemeteries in Ukraine are expanding almost as rapidly as the Northern Virginia McMansions and beachfront estates of executives from Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and assorted Beltway contractors benefiting from the second highest level of military spending since World War II. These are the real winners of the Ukraine proxy war, not average Ukrainians or Americans or Russians. The winners, or Europeans for that matter, the winners are people like Secretary of State Tony Blinken, who spent his time between the Obama and Biden administrations launching a consulting firm called West Exec Advisors, which secured lucrative government contracts for intelligence firms and the arms industry. Blinken's former partners at West Exec include Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines, CIA Deputy Director David Cohen, former White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, and almost a dozen current and former members of Biden's national security team. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, for his part, is a former and possibly future board member of Raytheon, and an ex-partner of Pine Island Capital Investment, which collaborates with West Exec and which Blinken himself has advised. Meanwhile, the current U.S. ambassador to this body, the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, is listed as a senior counsel at the Albright Stonebridge Group, a self-described commercial diplomacy firm that also finesses government contracts for the intelligence and arms sector, and which was founded by Madeleine Albright, infamously known for her comments that the deaths by sanctions of 500,000 Iraqi children were worth it. So while military-age Ukrainian men are ripped off the streets by military police and sent to the front lines, the financially and politically connected architects of this proxy war are planning to walk through the revolving door to reap unimaginable profits once their time in the Biden administration is over. For them, a negotiated settlement to this territorial dispute means an end to the cash cow of close to $150 billion in U.S. aid to Ukraine. So in closing, when the United States, my country, a permanent member of this council, has fallen under the control of a bipartisan regime which seeks to perpetuate a proxy war for as long as it takes, in the words of Joe Biden, which considers diplomacy synonymous with unilateral coercive measures to, quote, turn the ruble to rubble, as Biden pledged to do, whose leadership subverts negotiations in order to pursue profit while refusing to properly inform its own citizens what they're paying for, and pushes the sons and brothers of its supposed Ukrainian partners out onto a killing field in order to bludgeon a geopolitical rival, when both Zelensky and members of U.S. Congress are calling for preemptive strikes on Russia, which have nothing to do with Article 51 of the UN Charter, this council must take action to enforce that charter. That charter is clear that the Security Council must use its authority to guarantee a pacific settlement of dispute, particularly when it threatens international security. That should not only apply to Russia and Ukraine. This council has an obligation to strictly monitor and restrain the U.S. and the illegal military formation known as NATO. Thank you.
That was Max Blumenthal of Grey Zone speaking to the UN Security Council about the absolute folly that is the Ukraine war and the corruption, massive corruption that attends it. I mean, really, if you couple what he just said with what we know about the Biden family, there's a point where Americans, even Democrats, have to stand up and saying, we're not doing this anymore, right? I mean, can he be impeached? All of those deaths, all of this money gone, and very, very likely because in some way it aided the Biden family. Don't forget, he had the Ukraine file when old Hunter was working for Burisma with no credentials to do so. So anyway, I've talked about that a lot on the show. It's so blatant. You feel like you're going crazy. What more do they want? What more do they need? Wow. Anyway, so that was terrific. And I just want to say one more small legal, well, actually it was a large legal victory from a spiritual perspective. Over in the UK, the LGB Alliance, lesbians and gay men have been doing a magnificent job pushing back against trans extremism, and they want the T to be dropped from LGB, obviously, because it's tainted them now, and the extremism has. I'm sure it would have been welcomed until all hell broke loose, but why would they want to now be affiliated with people who not only abuse the children through this medical transitioning stuff they're doing inappropriately, I would add, but are winning all of these battles around mandating gender-affirming care without any kind of investigation and deplatforming people. I mean, one of the people who had their accounts in Scotland closed, it was the HSBC Bank, and it was done by a trans employee who had actually been a patron of the organization called Mermaids, which lost in court in the UK this week. And what Mermaids was trying to do was make the government force LGB Alliance into not having charity status anymore, which of course is awful for raising money. So that's wonderful. It was a wonderful victory. LGB Alliance won it. And it was touch and go that they wouldn't. But it means that slowly, the courts are doing their jobs over in the UK and in the States, maybe a little bit less so here in Canada. We're way behind on all of these issues, but, we'll get there. And, small steps for little feet, as they say. But there are victories happening. And some of the victories are happening for people I admire who've been fighting back through this long, dark night of the soul we've been living through. Jay Bhattacharya, Aaron Cariati, those great people, LGB Alliance in the UK, that's wonderful too. So we can take heart that the courts are being used in a way that may end some of this craziness. So let's look for some good court cases here in Canada to start happening too. Anyway, I'm Trish Wood. Stay critical. See ya.